In the summer of 1987, in the quiet suburb of Millbrook, Indiana, the Hartley men seemed to embody the American dream. A strong father, a loyal son, and a home that looked flawless from the street. But perfection was only a mask. When 16-year-old Samuel Hartley began experiencing terrifying blackouts, he stumbled onto a VHS tape that should never have existed. On it, his father appeared unchanged by time, sitting beside someone who looked exactly like Samuel, wearing his father's wedding band. What began as ordinary life in suburban America soon twisted into something darker. A curse that forced sons to inherit the lives of their fathers, where identity, memory, and even manhood blurred in horrifying ways. Inside the Hartley house, a nightmare was waiting, one that no man could easily escape. If this unsettling mystery already has your attention, stay tuned, because the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. And if you enjoy chilling, thought-provoking storytelling, hit like, subscribe, and share with another brother who loves a good dark tale. The Hartley house stood on Sycamore Street, a two-story home of white siding and green shutters. Inside lived David Hartley, a devoted father, and his only son, 16-year-old Samuel, who admired his father's quiet strength. From the outside, neighbors saw a normal household of men. David sold insurance, coached Little League, and grilled steaks on weekends. Samuel listened to rock cassettes, wore denim jackets, and played basketball in the driveway under his father's watchful eye. The community respected David. At church, he was always in the front pew, shaking hands firmly, offering guidance to younger men. Samuel grew up surrounded only by men, neighbors, coaches, ministers, all reinforcing what it meant to be part of their world. But beneath the surface of this suburban picture, Samuel had begun noticing moments that didn't quite fit. Blackouts, shifts in memory. His father's eyes sometimes looked older, harder, as though someone else was looking out from behind them. One evening, Samuel descended for dinner. The table was set with inherited china plates, passed down from his grandfather. David carved the roast with practiced hands, smiling warmly. Yet his eyes lingered on Samuel too intently, with something unreadable. "School all right, son?" David asked, placing meat on his plate. Samuel nodded, but unease stirred. His father's voice was calm, but under the amber light, Samuel thought it carried weight, like an echo from a man much older than him. The Hartley residence stood firm on Sycamore Street, its white siding and green shutters giving the impression of order. Inside lived David Hartley, a dedicated father, and his only son, Samuel, who admired strength and legacy. Neighbors regarded the Hartleys as a model household of men. David worked as an insurance agent, grilled steaks in the backyard, and led community sports. Samuel spent afternoons shooting hoops and listening to cassette tapes in his room. Every weekend, David hosted gatherings with uncles, cousins, and neighbors, always men. They filled the yard with smoke from barbecues, cold beer in hand, sharing stories of work, discipline, and manhood. Samuel absorbed every word like scripture. Samuel grew up in this world of fathers, brothers, and sons. Coaches barked advice, ministers preached about responsibility, uncles recounted military service. The absence of women was never questioned. Manhood was self-contained, unbroken, and unquestioned within this universe. But beneath this polished exterior, Samuel began noticing cracks. He had lost hours recently, blank spaces in memory. His father sometimes stared too long at him, eyes glinting with something ancient, unfamiliar, and strangely threatening. One evening, Samuel descended for dinner. The table was set with sturdy china, heirlooms from his grandfather. David sat at the head, carving roast beef with slow precision, smiling faintly, but his stare made Samuel's stomach tighten. "How was school, son?" David asked, voice steady, tone deep with authority. Samuel hesitated before replying, sensing hidden weight. Under the amber dining light, his father's eyes seemed older than his years, carrying secrets Samuel could not name. Dinner continued quietly, but Samuel could not shake the unease. David's smile faltered when Samuel asked to stay over at a friend's house. "No," he said abruptly, voice sharp, the denial cutting through the room. Samuel protested, confused by the harsh refusal. David's hand tightened around his fork, knuckles pale. His voice rose suddenly, shaking the plates. "You will stay here where you belong, Samuel." The outburst left the room frozen in silence. Moments later, David apologized, massaging his temples. "Headache," he muttered, letting his son go. Yet Samuel noticed his father's hands trembling and a strange odor in the air, roses mixed with something chemical, unsettling, unnatural within their masculine home. That night, Samuel lay in bed, staring at his ceiling. The house settled with familiar creaks, but he felt eyes on him. At 2:47 a.m., he awoke to footsteps outside his door, slow, deliberate, unmistakably male. The steps paused. The door creaked open slightly. Samuel forced himself to remain still, feigning sleep. A shadow filled the doorway, breathing heavy. Minutes stretched into eternity before the figure retreated down the hall toward the bathroom. Curiosity outweighed fear. Samuel crept down the hallway, pressing his ear against the bathroom door. Water ran. A low humming tune emerged, strange and dissonant. Then a whisper. "Almost time. The transfer must be complete." Samuel's chest tightened. Transfer? What did that mean? The water shut off, and the door creaked open. He raced back to bed, pulling blankets over his head. The figure paused outside his room, then finally left. When Samuel dared to open his eyes, his room looked the same. Posters, books, trophies. But something felt altered. On his dresser lay an old photograph, his father standing beside another boy who looked exactly like Samuel. The boy in the picture was older, wearing David's wedding band. On the back, scrawled in ink, were the words, "The cycle continues, DHS." Samuel's hands shook as he shoved it into his drawer. Sleep never came again that night. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a presence. Every shadow stretched too long. The perfect suburban house of men no longer felt like sanctuary. It felt like a cage. Samuel resolved to uncover the truth. His father's stare, the blackouts, the photograph, they were all connected. Something ran through the Hartley men, something inherited, something waiting. And Samuel knew the cycle had only just begun. Samuel walked into his history class one morning at 10:15, placing his textbook on the desk. The next moment he was home, in his room, wearing different clothes. 8 hours of memory had vanished. Panicked, Samuel stumbled downstairs. The house smelled of roasted meat. The television murmured in the background. His father appeared in the doorway, eyes unreadable for a second, before softening into concern. "Son, you're awake. How are you feeling?" "Awake?" Samuel demanded. "How did I get home?" David explained calmly. "The school called, said Samuel was disoriented, so he picked him up and brought him home." But Samuel remembered none of this, only the blankness. Samuel looked in the reflection of the microwave and froze. His hair, carefully styled that morning, was now slicked back in a way he never wore. His shirt, once casual denim, had been replaced with formal attire. "What's going on?" Samuel whispered. His father claimed Samuel had borrowed the clothes, wanting to look respectable. But Samuel's voice rose. "I don't remember any of this. Something's wrong." David avoided his eyes, tension crackling beneath his calm exterior. That night, Samuel heard humming again, low and reversed, like a lullaby played backward. It came from within his own walls. He barely slept, clutching his blanket, waiting for dawn to break the oppressive silence. At breakfast, David studied Samuel too closely. "Did you rest well?" he asked. Samuel admitted he had strange dreams. The house rearranged, photographs on the walls of strangers who looked exactly like him and his father. David frowned. "Just dreams," he muttered. but Samuel noticed his father's hand trembling as he sipped coffee. The unease spread deeper. Samuel could feel something unnatural stretching between them, something unspoken, binding them tighter each day. Later, Samuel confided in his closest friend, Jacob. "I lost time," Samuel explained quietly at lunch. "I was in class, then suddenly home, hours gone. My father says I was sick, but I don't believe him." Jacob looked stunned. "That's not normal. Maybe seizures?" Samuel shook his head. "Seizures don't change your clothes. Seizures don't make your father look at you like you're someone else entirely." The words lingered, heavier than either boy expected. The second blackout struck 3 days later. Samuel woke with soil under his fingernails, his hair matted with rose petals. His father calmly explained they had planted new bushes together. But Samuel saw no scratches, no dirt in the yard. The scent of the soil was wrong. It smelled like a graveyard, damp and heavy. Samuel wrote everything in a journal, times, dates, details of blackouts, determined to anchor himself before his identity slipped away completely. He approached his father's study one night, determined to ask for truth. Surrounded by paperwork and trophies, David looked older, exhausted. Samuel asked, "Has this happened before? With you? With your father?" The silence stretched before David finally answered. "Your grandfather had spells," David admitted. "Moments where he wasn't himself. My uncle's too. It runs in us, Samuel. A burden passed from father to son." His voice shook as if confessing treason. Samuel's blood ran cold. "I found a photograph," he said, describing the boy who looked exactly like him, older, wearing David's ring. David's face darkened. "Some truths are dangerous," he warned. "Some things are better left buried." That night, Samuel awoke in his father's bed, wearing his father's night clothes. David snored beside him, oblivious. Samuel stumbled to the mirror and recoiled. His hair had streaks of gray. His hands looked years older. From the hallway came humming again, low, reversed, and undeniably male. Samuel opened his bedroom door to find David, sitting calmly on Samuel's bed, smiling too wide, and speaking in Samuel's own voice. "Did you sleep well, father?" Samuel discovered the tape by accident. It was wedged behind the water heater in the basement, wrapped in an old grocery bag. The label, written in careful handwriting, read simply, "Family Christmas 1983. Confused, Samuel carried the VHS upstairs. He would have been 12 in 1983, old enough to remember a Christmas gathering. Yet something felt wrong. He had no recollection of such a recording existing. He slid the tape into the player. The screen filled with static before clearing into an image of the dining room. There sat his father, carving turkey, smiling warmly as though it were yesterday. But what froze Samuel's blood was not his father's familiar face. It was the boy seated across the table. He looked exactly like Samuel, older by a few years, and wore David Hartley's wedding band. The camera panned across the room. The walls, the furniture, all the same as now, unchanged. But the timestamp read 4 years earlier, when Samuel had been a child, not a young man. Samuel's hands shook. His father appeared exactly the same, not a day younger. The boy on screen mirrored Samuel's every feature, but his posture carried the weight of someone already aged by burden. He paused the tape and leaned back, sweat beading on his forehead. This was impossible. He existed twice, once as a boy watching the tape and again as a figure seated with his father. Samuel rewound and played it again, searching for flaws. But the recording was seamless. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the cutting of turkey. Ordinary sounds cloaking an extraordinary horror. The impossible had been captured on film. The boy in the tape glanced at the camera briefly. His eyes seemed to lock directly with Samuel's, across time. For a second, Samuel swore the boy mouthed words. The cycle continues. Terrified, Samuel ejected the tape. He shoved it back into its bag and hid it under his mattress. Yet the images replayed in his head, sharper than any nightmare, haunting his waking hours. He tried to confront his father about it. "Did we ever record a Christmas gathering?" Samuel asked casually. David's fork froze mid-air. His eyes flickered with something dark before he forced a smile. "No." The denial was too quick, too controlled. Samuel pressed further. "Then why did I find a tape labeled 1983? David's jaw tightened. "You're imagining things, son. Dreams spill into memory. Don't confuse them." His voice cracked faintly. Samuel stormed to his room, heart racing. He retrieved the photo he had found earlier, placing it beside the VHS tape. Both showed impossible versions of himself, bound to his father's presence like mirrored shadows. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded amplified. He heard footsteps in the hall again, slow and deliberate, pausing outside his door before moving to the basement where the tape had been hidden. He forced himself to stay still, but curiosity consumed him. Creeping down the stairs, he saw faint light flickering from the basement doorframe. His father stood hunched over the VHS player, watching the tape in silence. On screen, both versions of Samuel sat at the table. His father stared at the images with an expression of pride and sorrow combined, whispering under his breath. The cycle must hold. The transfer must endure. Samuel's chest tightened. His father knew. The tape was no accident. It was a record, a reminder, a warning. The Hartley men were trapped in something timeless, a cycle stronger than blood. Samuel retreated quietly to his room, his mind unraveling. The perfect suburban life of men had been exposed as a facade. The tape proved it. He was not living his own destiny. He was living his father's. And as dawn broke, Samuel realized the truth. The cycle would not end with him. The house, the photographs, the tape, all conspired to remind him. The curse had already chosen its next victim. Daniel stumbled through the undergrowth, lungs burning, heart hammering like a war drum. Behind him, the chants of Whitlock men reverberated through the forest, guttural waves that seemed to chase him across the mountains. When the noise finally dimmed, Daniel collapsed against a moss-covered boulder. He steadied his breath, but the echo lingered inside his skull. The sound wasn't just noise, it was command, etched deep into bone. He reached for his recorder, whispering into the microphone. "The Whitlocks are not surviving. They're cultivating. Every generation designed to hollow themselves further. I've seen it. They're not men anymore. They're vessels." That night, in a rotting motel outside the nearest town, Daniel loaded the final reel into his projector. He braced himself. If the previous films showed rituals, this one promised the revelation of purpose. The reel began in darkness. A single lantern swayed, illuminating a cavern carved beneath the central hall. Whitlock men stood in a spiral formation, their bodies contorted, their shoulder hands clasped in an unbroken circle. At the center lay a figure covered in cloth. The patriarch stepped forward, his jaw extended, his eyes glowing faintly. He pulled away the cloth, revealing a boy, no older than 12, twitching violently. The boy's anatomy was more alien than any Daniel had yet seen. 4 hands sprouted from shoulders, 2 more from ribs, and his skull was elongated into a grotesque dome. His chest rose with unnatural rhythm. A chant began, low and thunderous. The patriarch raised a syringe of bone filled with black fluid. He plunged it into the boy's neck. The child convulsed, his eyes snapping open, solid black orbs. The boy's many hands moved in synchrony, drawing sigils in the air. Symbols shimmered, pulsing with light that hurt Daniel's eyes. He shielded his face, yet the glow seemed to radiate from inside his skull. The camera shook as the chanting rose. The boy's mouth opened impossibly wide, releasing a sound that split the air. It was not human speech. It was layered voices, old as stone, vast as oceans. Daniel froze the frame. The black eyes stared through the screen, aware. calculating. This was the 14th generation. Not a boy, not a son, but a vessel, awakened and filled with something unspeakable. The reel continued. The vessel stood unaided, limbs trembling, yet guided by invisible strength. Whitlock men bowed as one, their guttural chants shifting into harmonies too precise for human throats. They worshipped not flesh, but the presence within. Then the vessel spoke. Its words were alien, guttural, yet comprehensible. The hollow is prepared. The time is near. Daniel felt his veins chill. This was prophecy, not performance. The arrival was imminent. The vessel turned, staring directly into the camera. For a moment, Daniel swore it saw him. Across decades of celluloid, across generations, the black eyes seemed to pierce the present. He snapped the projector off in terror. Silence filled the room, but the echoes remained. Daniel realized the Whitlocks had not just prepared for this moment. They had been waiting for someone like him, an outsider to witness, record, and spread their truth. The letter from Ezra returned to his thoughts. I am the last. The circle nears completion. Daniel now understood Ezra's desperation. He was not warning Daniel of the past. He was warning him of the future. Daniel's reflection in the motel mirror startled him. His face looked pale, haunted, yet his eyes seemed deeper, darker. He leaned closer, whispering, "What if they don't just want the Whitlocks? What if they want all of us?" Outside, a truck passed, headlights cutting across the curtains. For a second, the beam revealed a shadow by the door, tall, malformed, unmoving. When Daniel yanked the curtain back, the lot was empty. He sat frozen, whiskey untouched, the projector still warm. The reels, the ledger, the chants, the vessel, all of it pointed to one inevitable truth. The 14th generation had awakened, and it was watching. Daniel packed the reels, the ledger, and Ezra's letter into his duffel bag. Each item throbbed with dread, as though carrying fragments of the hollow itself. He felt like a courier of damnation. Driving through winding mountain roads, he considered his options. He could release the evidence to universities, archives, and networks, exposing the Whitlocks. But doing so risked unleashing awareness of the vessel beyond its borders. Every chant, every entry, every black-eyed stare pointed toward one outcome. The vessel needed recognition. To spread, it required witnesses. Daniel feared he had already given it exactly what it craved. At a gas station miles from Perdition Hollow, an old attendant eyed Daniel's duffel. "You been up there?" he asked, voice gravelly. His pupils shrank. "Men who go don't come back, right?" Daniel nodded silently. He could not risk details. The attendant's words confirmed what he already knew. Locals had long sensed the hollow's curse. It was whispered among men, passed like warnings carved into bone. Back at his motel, Daniel unrolled maps, marking locations tied to Whitlock appearances. Circles formed a pattern, spirals radiating outward, always pointing back to Perdition Hollow. The vessel's reach was growing, rippling beyond mountains. He considered burning the evidence. Flames consuming reels and ledger, erasing every trace. But what if destruction freed what was trapped inside? Fire could sever bindings rather than prevent them. The thought froze his hand. Instead, he wrote. Hours passed as he filled notebooks with every detail, the ledger's entries, Ezra's letter, Hensley's warnings, Crawford's map. If he vanished, his testimony would remain, scattered among trusted colleagues, all male archivists. The night deepened. Through thin motel walls, Daniel heard whispers. Not from neighbors, but from air itself, guttural syllables vibrating through his skull. He pressed his palms against his ears, but the voices burrowed deeper. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water across his face. In the cracked mirror, his reflection warped. His eyes darkened, his jaw widened. For a heartbeat, he looked like them, like a Whitlock vessel. Rage surged, and Daniel smashed the mirror with his fist. Blood dripped across porcelain, bright against the dim light. The voices receded, replaced by silence broken only by his own ragged breathing. The hollow retreated. But the reprieve would not last. Daniel knew the vessel was awake, moving, preparing to stretch beyond the mountains. If he failed to act, mankind itself might inherit the Whitlock's curse. He returned to his desk, hands trembling as he loaded a revolver. Its weight grounded him. This would not stop the vessel, but it could stop his own body from becoming its next container. Still, another path flickered. What if destruction of the vessel's relics starved it of memory? What if cutting ties to history ended the circle? Daniel's fate hinged on one impossible choice. Dawn bled across the horizon, mist curling over ridge lines. Daniel gathered the reels, ledger, and letter. He stood at the motel window, whispering, "This ends with me. No more witnesses. No more vessels." His final act remains uncertain. Some say the reels were burned, the ledger buried in salt, the letter drowned in river currents. Others claim Daniel vanished into the hollow, taking the evidence with him. What is known is this: the Whitlocks were never seen again. Yet strange chants are still reported in Appalachia, whispers of men clapping shoulder hands in forests where no towns exist. Shadows moving where no roads lead. Perhaps Daniel ended it. Perhaps the vessel still waits. Either way, the story remains a warning. Not all lineages seek survival. Some seek hollowing, some seek surrender, and some prepare the world for something else. Weeks passed after the reversal. Samuel carried himself differently, shoulders squared with defiance, yet weighed by dread. He had survived his father's attempt, but every day brought whispers inside his blood, echoes of the hunger. David lay bedridden, gaunt, barely moving. His once commanding presence had diminished to shadows. Samuel brought him meals, but his father barely ate. "The cycle isn't broken," David croaked. "It only sleeps. You will learn." Samuel refused to believe it. He studied his own reflection daily, searching for signs of decay. Sometimes he saw brightness in his eyes. Other times, the faint shimmer of something older, something patient, lurking beneath. The house felt emptier without David's constant authority. Yet silence brought no comfort. At night, Samuel dreamed of uncles and grandfathers, rows of Hartley men standing in judgment, whispering in unison, "You cannot escape the line." One dream lingered, Samuel as an old man, standing over his own son. He reached out, hands trembling, craving youth. His son's eyes filled with fear. Samuel awoke screaming, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like thunder. He began running each morning, desperate to feel alive. Wind against his face, sweat down his back, proof he still owned his body. But the hunger whispered, reminding him every breath might be borrowed. One afternoon, Samuel opened his father's closet. Inside, he found a cedar box containing rings, cufflinks, and watches, each engraved with initials of Hartley men. He realized each item belonged to sons consumed by fathers before him. Among the trinkets lay a letter written by Elias. It warned, "The line cannot be severed. At best, you delay. At worst, you pass the hunger forward. Beware the day your son comes of age." Samuel folded the letter tightly, shoving it into his pocket. Rage burned inside him. He would not repeat Elias's fate, nor David's. He swore silently. If the hunger came, he would destroy it himself. Still, doubts haunted him. Each night the humming returned, low and reversed, echoing through walls. Sometimes it was his father's voice, sometimes his grandfather's, sometimes his own. Older, wearier, commanding him to submit. David's health declined further. On his final night, he called Samuel to his side, his eyes dim but piercing, locked on his son. "Forgive me," he whispered, "but when hunger calls you, you will understand." Samuel gripped his father's hand as it went cold. No tears came. only silence. Another Hartley man was gone, leaving Samuel as the line's sole bearer. The house felt heavier, the curse thicker, pressing in. In the following weeks, Samuel cleaned the attic. He burned old photographs, smashed VHS tapes, destroyed heirlooms. Yet even as smoke curled upward, he knew destruction couldn't erase what lived inside his veins. The line endured. One evening, Samuel sat alone in the living room. The television flickered with static. Then, without explanation, an image appeared. Himself, years older, seated beside a boy who looked exactly like him. The boy's lips moved silently, but Samuel understood the words. The cycle continues. His heart clenched. He screamed at the screen, hurling the remote, shattering glass. But the image lingered in his mind, carved like stone. Neighbors noticed Samuel becoming distant. He no longer laughed, no longer joined games. He spent hours pacing the yard, muttering oaths to himself, determined to outlast the curse. Yet deep down, fear gnawed relentlessly. Years passed. Samuel grew into a man, broad-shouldered, strong, respected. But on his 35th birthday, he awoke with trembling hands. In the mirror, he saw faint gray creeping at his temples, mocking his youth. He realized his father's warning was truth. The cycle did not end with David's death. The hunger had only lain dormant, waiting. And now, as another Hartley son matured, Samuel understood the curse was stirring again. Years slipped away, and Samuel aged into middle life. His body remained strong, his mind sharp, but each morning he examined his reflection with dread. The hunger stirred faintly, whispering promises of strength at another man's expense. His own son, Nathan, grew tall and lean, 16 years old, filled with energy and curiosity. Samuel loved him fiercely. Yet, deep inside, fear twisted. Nathan's youth was everything the curse demanded, everything Samuel once fought to protect. Nathan admired his father, unaware of the darkness lurking within their lineage. He spoke of basketball tryouts, college plans, friendships with other boys. Samuel smiled, encouraged him, but inside, guilt and terror churned relentlessly. The attic remained sealed, the journal hidden, but Samuel knew knowledge alone could not save Nathan. The curse did not require awareness. It waited silently, growing stronger with each generation, demanding continuation through father and son. One winter night, Samuel awoke in Nathan's bed, wearing his son's clothes. His reflection in the window was younger, Nathan's face staring back. The hunger had made its move. Samuel recoiled in horror, clutching his chest. Nathan entered, startled. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Samuel's voice cracked as he answered, "I don't know." But he did know. The curse was shifting, tempting him to claim his son's youth. For days, Samuel avoided Nathan, locking himself in his study, scribbling in notebooks. He replayed Elias's words, David's chants, the reversal. Was there truly any escape, or had resistance only delayed the inevitable takeover? At dinner, Nathan finally confronted him. "You're acting strange, Dad. Are you sick?" Samuel forced a smile. "Just tired." But Nathan's worried eyes mirrored the same fear Samuel once held when staring at his own father. That night, Samuel stood at Nathan's doorway. The hunger roared inside him, urging him to step forward, to take, to consume. His fists trembled. Every Hartley before him had failed in this very moment, but Samuel remembered the reversal. He remembered choosing defiance. He entered Nathan's room not as predator, but as protector. He whispered, "You will not suffer as I did. The line ends here." He retrieved the silver knife, the cursed heirloom. Instead of using it against his son, Samuel pressed the blade against his own palm. Blood dripped onto the floor. He chanted not for transfer, but for sacrifice. The air thickened, trembling with energy. Shadows writhed. Samuel felt his strength draining, but not into Nathan, into the void itself. His body weakened, but his son stirred only slightly, safe, untouched. The curse recoiled violently. Nathan awoke, confused. "Dad?" Samuel, pale and trembling, smiled faintly. "Remember me as I am, not as them." His words cracked. He knew he had diverted the curse by giving himself willingly to its hunger. Samuel collapsed as the room calmed. Nathan knelt, shaking him. "Stay with me." But Samuel only whispered, "Break it. Never let it return." Then silence filled the house, and Samuel's body stilled. For the first time in generations, a Hartley son had chosen sacrifice instead of continuation. The line of theft, transfer, and hunger fractured at last, broken by choice rather than curse. Years later, Nathan grew into a man haunted by memory. He told no one of that night, but he carried Samuel's sacrifice as both burden and strength, determined to live free, to forge a different path. Still, sometimes in the quiet hours, Nathan swore he heard humming in the walls, low, reversed, echoing the voices of uncles, grandfathers, fathers long gone. And he wondered, was the curse truly ended or merely waiting? The Hartley story closed with Samuel's defiance, but the question remained. In a universe of fathers and sons, could hunger ever be destroyed, or would choice always stand against curse, fragile yet unyielding, generation after generation?